Okay. Give me a second.
Они просто тебя ждут.
I'd like it to go live. All right. So I want to tell you a little bit of what's been going on this week. This past Shabbat was supposed to be the annual Kinus convention of Shluchim, of rabbis from around the world, Chabad rabbis around the world. It's always on this Shabbat of Chayei Sarah, this past week. We have this gathering where thousands of rabbis, we come together to talk, I just want you to imagine what we're talking about. We're talking about people that come from generally the USA and Israel. Generally, that's where they come from. And now they get sent to the furthest corners on the earth. I'm talking about the furthest corners on the earth, to places which have no connection to Judaism almost. Now we think of Dingley, and it's like, at least we got, there's a community around here. But sometimes they're in a place where they're the only religious family. And they're there just because there's other fellow Jews. They could be in the middle of Africa, the middle of Asia, the middle of Arabic countries. And they don't see another fellow religious Chabad Jew, whatever it is, and they come back and they feel somewhat disconnected, come together, they get re-inspired, they get new vitality for the upcoming year. And as a Chabad Shliach, Chabad emissary, this is a really powerful moment. I haven't managed to go every year, but I've gone a couple of times. And I went last year, and last year was just absolutely incredible. Now this year, as you could imagine, getting people to come all in, 5,000 people to come in from different parts of the world, and all be in one room, sounds great in normal circumstances, but in COVID time just sounds a little bit weird, where we kind of have forgotten normal times when we used to do that. So what do? They made a virtual gathering. Now, one of the main aspects of this gathering is the Saturday night program. Saturday night program, they go to some big hall somewhere, and people get together, they speak, and they talk about big major concepts coming up in Chabad, whatever it is. And it's usually extremely inspirational. The main event is Sunday night, usually, where they have a massive banquet, everyone's there. I'm going to share a link in our weekly email to the major banquet which they did this year, which is just obviously a virtual show, almost, but it's still very powerful. So now the Saturday night is usually quite powerful. So what they did this year, welcome Superman. It's great to have you here. What they did this year is they decided that on the Saturday night, they're going to be able to do one long Farbrengen. Farbrengen is a Hasidic gathering where we talk about, we encourage each other, we inspire each other, we tell people stories, we tell people words of inspiration, about memories, and it's a beautiful experience, usually say Lo L'chaim. So what they announced in their page was, in the email going out to 5,000 Chabad couples, that on this past Saturday night, this was before a couple of weeks ago, they said, but this happened this past Saturday night, we're going to have an 18-hour long continuous Farbrengen. It's going to start in Australia, where Shabbos comes out one of the first. So we here in Australia, several of us got together in a legal way, in the way that we're allowed to based on restaurants, etc., like that. And we started this program when it was still Shabbos in almost the entire rest of the world. About 2 hours after we started, 11:30 at night, Shabbos had just come out in Asia. So Asia took over. It was all the same Zoom call. Asia takes over, and now, of course, we could also listen in. And then as it comes out, slowly but surely, then Europe starts sending Shabbos by the time Asia finishes, and they go for another few hours. Shabbos finishes, and then in Europe, and then in Israel, and then in South Africa, and then as time goes on. So it goes through the entire world, and every country, as Shabbos finishes in their country, they take over this Farbrengen, till eventually it finishes in Hawaii, in Alaska and Hawaii. They're the last for Shabbos to come out. Now you can imagine what an incredible this thing is. This was an 18, 19 or 20-hour program. Here's the key. Here's something incredible that happened. That Farbrengen that started on Saturday night is still going 72 hours later.
Wow.
Right now, I was just listening into that Farbrengen. There's still hundreds of people. Now, nobody's been sitting there. You might think Chabad rabbis are bored. Nobody's been sitting there for 72 hours, obviously. But when you have 5,000 people around the world, everybody has a few minutes that they could chaperine and to listen to something. So they joined. I had a few minutes while I was driving. I dialed in Zoom. You could dial in. I dialed in while I was driving and I listened. 600 people are also listening. And then there's different times you could tell where it is. As it will become later now in America, people are starting to drop off. Well, America's more or less dropped off, and people in Europe are waking up. In Australia, it's nighttime. So Australian rabbis are starting to tune in. And this has been ongoing, and it's been the most phenomenal thing to be part of. I would love to open it to everybody, but you have to have a particular shliach login password account. That's how you get the login. So I can't share it, but it's just been quite a phenomenal thing. But I would like to share with you something that was said by the rabbi that's probably in the place which is one of the most ahead of time in the world, even more than Australia. And where would I be thinking? The rabbi in New Zealand. There's only 1 or 2 Chabad rabbi emissaries in New Zealand, and they're quite isolated, so they weren't going to start the Zoom by themselves. They kind of waited for Australia. But it was really a little bit later at night. They're about a good 3 hours ahead of us. I want to tell you a story. I want to start off and get into our discussion tonight with this story. And I think it's a really powerful story. And this, he was selling, I think he's in Wellington, if I'm not mistaken. And he said this story to us live on Saturday night to the Australian group. At that time was just Australia on. From his home in New Zealand. So he's alone in New Zealand in the sense that there's no other real other Chabad family, definitely not close. No other really, I don't know if he has any other religious families around him, but he has a community. There's a community over there. And he said, you know, we know here in Australia, we kind of know what's been happening in New Zealand. People have been, they've kind of got in control of the virus very quickly, but they were also extremely, you know, it's an isolated island, even more than Australia, and a very tiny island, and whatever it is. So he said he felt he's only been there for 2 years. He's a young guy, slightly younger than me. And he said since he's been the last 2 years, as you can imagine, he's totally far away from family and friends. He's made plenty of new friends in his community. It's been a real struggle. And COVID hasn't been much easier. And he said that, you know, sometimes not having minyanim, and for a Chabad guy, a religious guy being brought up with all these things and whatever we brought up with, being far and isolated could be really difficult. He said, you know, but you miss that sometimes. You miss out on certain experiences. That's fine. But what happened this year was, it came after Yom Kippur, and he had not yet received his complete set of lulav and etrog. He had his lulav had arrived, his etrog had arrived, and you need 4 species. He was missing the myrtle, and he was missing he had the myrtle, he was missing the willow leaves. And this really bothered him. Because as great as you could have the most beautiful esrog, which you could have paid $1,000 for, you could have had the most beautiful lulav, but if you're missing one of the species, or one of the species is not kosher, you cannot perform the mitzvah. The mitzvah can only be performed if you have all 4 species. And he's missing the most basic of those species, the willow. By the way, in Australia this year, we also struggled with willows, but we managed to get it in eventually, and we got whatever, the Israeli ones, not the American ones, which aren't as good. Anyway, he couldn't get hold of it. It's now Erev Sukkot. He's desperate to be able to make the bracha. So his wife was expecting quite a few guests that day, and he usually stays when when they're having a lot of guests, he stays to help cook with his wife. He tells his wife, listen, we don't have lulav and etrog. We're not going to be able to even do sukkot. I've got to go and try to find a willow tree. And he drives around all over New Zealand trying to find a willow tree. And while he's driving, he goes from place to place to place. He just simply could not find a willow tree. Either he didn't know well enough what it was, or he just couldn't find it. Hours later, when it's just a couple of hours, he comes back home and he's devastated. It'll be his first sukkot without a lulav, without being able to make the lulav. And this is a man that has put everything on the line, self-sacrifice, in order to be able to bring life and Judaism to fellow Jews. And here he himself won't be able to practice one of these most fundamental concepts of Judaism. And he literally says he wanted to cry. But his wife thought of an idea. His wife said, hold on a second, let's think of who we can call. Maybe somebody could help us. And they remembered that they have a friend that's a florist. Maybe she will know where we can find a lulav. She calls her friend the florist and says, do you know where we can get hold of willows? She says, actually, that happens to be, we managed to get hold. We actually have a bunch of willows, but they're not in the greatest condition, but I'll bring them over. She comes over with the willow. She comes over with the willows, but they don't look like they're anything that could be used. There's certain requirements of how long they have to be. They have to have enough leaves at the top. They couldn't really find. They go through the entire bunch, and they're almost finished the bunch, and they can't find one of those willows that are kosher enough to make a blessing on. He's about to give up, and they look through it again, and finally they find two branches. You need two. They were just kosher. And there's a whole bunch of people that were in the house that were coming to help them prepare. And as he finds these two branches, small branches of willow, he bursts out crying. And people are like, it's just leaves, why are you crying? And he said, we take for granted and we forget about the small things in life. The small things of being able to do a basic mitzvah. We think about myself, like being connected with all these Jews in the most crazy places all over Africa and Europe and just all different places around the world. It just lets you think of incredible what it is, where you have literally Chabad in thousands of places, and some people really struggle. They have it, and we can take it for granted. And one of the incredible things about this virus is it's taught us that we can't take advantage, and we have to remember how special and how lucky we are. We have a shul, we have kosher foods if we want. We're able to get hold of what we need. And this virus has also taught us that we should really appreciate it. Now, there's so much more I could talk about the story, but I want to take one more point about the story that I would like to talk to you about. When you look at the lulav and etrog, we're told that the lulav and etrog represents 4 types of Jews. The etrog has a smell and a taste. That represents a Jew that is very learned and does lots of good deeds. The lulav only comes from a day palm, which just has a taste. No smell. That represents a Jew that studies but doesn't do many good deeds. The myrtle has a good smell but no taste. That represents a Jew that does good deeds but doesn't do much studying. And the willow has no smell or taste. That represents a Jew that is not necessarily, we wouldn't consider them a very good Jew. They don't do much mitzvot. They don't study much. They don't do much. Nevertheless, we're told that the only way you can do the mitzvah on Sukkot is that when you have all 4 species together. If you're missing even if you're missing the willow, which represents the lowest type of Jew, without that lowly Jew, you're lost. It's incomplete. You can have all the most beautiful things. You have the greatest rabbis. If you're missing the most simple, even sinful Jew, you're missing the picture. And here you see the story of this Jew, of this man. He was literally missing the willow, and he couldn't do the mitzvah. This is a lead on to what I want to talk to our topic tonight. Our topic tonight, yes.
Sorry, is it too early to ask a question on that?
For you, yes.
Kind of. It's kind of too early because I'm just getting introduced. I'm just getting inside. Give me a second.
Or maybe I'll notice the willow when it's put together with the other ingredients. It's not put physically lower in the lulav. It's the same height, yeah, as all the other elements.
It's the same height as the myrtle.
It's the same height, so it's not actually lower or worth less.
No, everything is the same value.
That's the point. That's what I wanted to check.
Yeah, well, everything is the same value. Well, you don't pay the same amount for them. I could tell you that the Esau costs by far the most. You could be paying. You can.
Yeah, but in terms of importance to the mitzvah, importance to the lulav, the so-called, we may say lowly willow, but it's not. It's different, but not lower.
Right. No, it's not lowly as in what it represents. It represents the Jew that is on a low spiritual status. That's what it represents. But nevertheless, it's just when it comes to doing the performance of the mitzvah, you require that one just as much as you require all the other three.
Yep. So it's equally important.
That's right.
Thank you.
So now I wanted to, that's a lead on. First of all, I wanted to tell you the story because the story really inspired me. Almost brought me to tears hearing about the shliach. That what does he care about? He cares about the fact that he can't do a mitzvah. What brings him to tears and what brings him to joy is the fact that he could literally be able to do a basic mitzvah of lulav and etrog that we just take for granted. That just seems so simple and obvious. But when you don't have it, how much does it bother you? And it really hit a nerve because it is that important. But sometimes we forget just how important very basic and simple things are. But it's exactly this concept of this lowly, so to speak, the willow that represents a Jew that is not necessarily on the greatest spiritual level. That's exactly the topic I wanted to talk to you about tonight. In this week's portion, we're going to talk about the blessings that Yitzchak, that Isaac wants to give to Esau. And the question is, Esau, according to all the commentaries, is the most evil of people. He's a murderer. He's an abuser. Why would Yitzchak, who's supposed to be an incredibly spiritual giant, who we call our forefather, we put him on the same level as Abraham and Yaakov, some of the greatest Jews in history. Why would this man make such a terrible mistake and want to give this blessing to such an evil person? He's got a beautiful, immaculate son, Yaakov. Doesn't ever do anything wrong. Not only doesn't do anything, he's such a good person. He goes out of his way to always do the right thing, to always help people. Yet he wants to give the blessings to who? To Esau. Why is that? So to answer this question, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story that the Talmud tells us about the time of Mashiach. It's almost like a parable of what happens in the coming of Mashiach. The Talmud says something really strange. The Talmud says that when Mashiach's going to come, God is going to go to Abraham, or there's going to come a time that God comes to Abraham and is going to say, Abraham, your children have sinned. What should I do with it? So Abraham will say, well, if they sin, they deserve to get punished. So do whatever you have to do to correct their path. Then he goes to Yaakov and he says, Yaakov, what should you do? What should I do? Your children have sinned. The Jewish people have sinned. They've gone away from the path of the covenant. So Yaakov says, well, if that's the case, then they should be punished. They should get what comes to them, what they deserve. He comes to Yitzchak and he says, Yitzchak, your children have sinned. So Yitzchak said, so what? So they sinned. Who, like, he's almost like defending the people. He starts to defend the people. Now we know that this is a concept that Abraham and Yaakov did as well. But what he says, and if you have to punish them, says Yitzchak, then half is for you, half is for me. They're good people. Now here's the thing. What does this whole story mean? Why is Yitzchak, out of all the three, the one that chooses to defend the people? It's a very important characteristic. Now, when we're going to talk about our forefathers, we call them our forefathers and that we're our children. We don't say that about the 12 tribes, that they're our forefathers. We don't say it about anybody else other than these three people. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why do we say specifically about these three people that they are our forefathers? Well, you could say because we all come from them. We don't all come from the tribes. That's true. That's a good reason. But also, our fathers mean that they are the ones that we inherit their characteristics from. So we have to understand there's something really interesting. When you look at the story of Abraham, Abraham takes up 2.5 portions almost. When you look at the stories of Yaakov, he takes up many stories. He's in general, we refer to him as the most important of our fathers. We have so many stories about Yaakov. When it comes to Yitzchak, it's just this portion. There's almost nothing that we have on Yitzchak. It's very, very simple. And not only that, Yitzchak lived for the longest out of all of them. Yitzchak lives till the age of 180. Abraham lives till 175. And Yaakov, I just forgot, but he doesn't live as long. Okay, so what do we see? That Yitzchak lives the longest, yet we have the least information on him. So here's the thing. How are we going to understand the story? What does it actually tell us about Yitzchak in this week's portion beforehand? Before Yitzchak wants to give the blessings to Esau, what does it tell us about Yitzchak? It tells us that he loved, that he would dig wells. He was a well digger. So what's the greatness about being a well? The Torah wants to tell us and finds it extremely important to tell us that the one great thing, those numerous great things, so many great things that Yitzchak does. But why does the Torah decide that the thing that they have to tell us about Yitzchak is that he's a well digger? What's so important about digging wells? You take a spade and you dig, boom, 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 boom. It's a lot of hard work. Great. I know a bunch of tradies that could do the same job. There's thousands, millions of these people. Why was it so important? So first of all, in today's day and age, yes, people that could dig, you have thousands, unending. But it was a unique thing. What is the concept? Obviously, the Torah has a very deep message. Nothing in the Torah is just because. There's always a deep meaning behind it. There's obviously a very deep concept that is going on over here in these digging of wells. In order to be able to dig a well, what do you have to do? You have to dig deep, deep. What do you dig through? You dig through dirt and muck. But when you dig deep enough and far enough, what do you find eventually?
Well, water.
You find water. You know, it's interesting. We're looking about possibly building a mikveh for our community. And the one concept that the rabbi keeps on asking us, the rabbi from overseas has been in the talks with me, is he wants to know, where's the water table? Where's the water? Where do you hit water? Because you've got to dig pretty deep. He wants to make sure we're not going to be hitting water. And if we do hit water, how do we do it, etc. By the way, some of the old mikvahs specifically try to hit water because that's kosher water for a mikvah. Back to our case, the story of Yitzchak. When you're busy digging a well, what do? You've got to go through all that dirt and all that muck until you eventually arrive at water. What is water? It's a wellspring of living, clean, beautiful water. The water under the ground is supposed to be some of the purest and cleanest water, unblemished. It's beautiful, clean water. That gives life. What is life? Life is godliness, is joy, is goodness, is purity, is holiness. The essence of everything. So what is the lesson that we learn from Yitzchak? If you want to be able to find joy, if you want to be able to find life, if you want to find goodness and godliness, you've got to dig. You've got to dig through the deepest and darkest and most despicable and disgusting things. You've got to dig up all that dirt. And when you do that, you have to know that beyond all that muck and all that dirt, there is life. There's goodness. There's beauty. So going back to our case, what is Yitzchak doing? Yitzchak's a well digger. What does it mean that Yitzchak's a well digger? Yitzchak was the person that knew that deep, deep, deep down, if you dig, we used to say that 6 feet under, he's a good guy, or if you dig deep enough, he's good. That's exactly the point. Yitzchak didn't just think that, he didn't just know it, he lived that. He lived that every single human being was truly good. The only problem was that sometimes they get covered in dirt. In some of the last years of the Rebbe's life, he would, for the last 5 or 6 years before of his life, there was thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands at sometimes of people waiting to visit him, and you couldn't. It just simply was not physically possible. He had an extremely busy schedule, and everybody in the world wanted to visit him. So he changed that he would start giving out dollars on Sunday. So what he would do is he would stand on Sunday, every single Sunday, and thousands of people every Sunday for hours, from sometimes like 11 o'clock in the morning till 7, 8 o'clock at night sometimes. And they would go quick. You could see these videos online, going past getting $1, simply to be able to see and get a basic blessing from the Rebbe. One time an elder lady comes to the Rebbe, and generally older people, they try to push forward because the line was too long. They didn't want people to wait for too long. She says, Rebbe, I've been standing here for just a couple of, like an hour or so, and my feet are aching. You've been here for so many hours and you seem refreshed and unfazed. How is that? So the Rebbe replied, when you're counting, if a person is counting diamonds, they don't get tired. But in order to get to a diamond, that's the story. But you know that when you go to find diamonds, if you find diamonds, you got to dig deep. Mines are not on top of the ground. Mines are deep, deep under the ground. That's where they find all the precious jewels. Now here's the thing. Yitzchak knew that every Jew deep down is a diamond. But you had to dig deep in order to find it. Sometimes the exterior can make a person look as though they're not a great person. Yitzchak is the ultimate optimist and believer in people. We call him Yitzchak, and in Kabbalistically, he represents the concept of discipline. But that discipline was a discipline, and severity and stringiness and strictness was all there to help him achieve one thing: to find goodness, to find water, to dig deep and find. So here you have this concept. You have Yitzchak. He has two sons. One is just obviously and clearly an absolute gem. Yaakov, his son Jacob, we call to him as Hatamim, the pure, innocent, great person. Naturally good. And then he's got Esau, who's the complete opposite. A rough, terrible person. That on the outside, he just looks like somebody that you just want to have nothing to do with. But here's the thing. Yitzchak knows that if Esau is this way, then deep down, there's something really powerful. And therefore, he knows that if he's going to give the blessings to Esau, he'll be able to take those blessings. He's hoping that Esau will be able to take those blessings and do something incredible with them and reveal that dormant, hidden potential inside of him. And that's why he wants to give that. Why does he love Esau so much? Because he sees in him something which is just so powerful. That's the story, by the way, of what he says in the Talmud when the Mashiach comes and we talk about the punishment. He says, no, you're judging God. Don't judge the people the way you see them. Judge them the way they are in truth. Dig a little bit deeper. Everybody goes through hard times. Nobody is truly this bad. And therefore he wants to give the blessings to this person, Esau. And what's his greatest pleasure is that Esau will bring him mat'amim, will bring him will go and bring him something special to eat. You know, one of the things that this concept is one of the fundamental concepts within Hasidism, especially Chabad Hasidism. And we know that one of the fundamental teachings is the meaning of this concept is that on the outside, as Jews, we often appear to all look different. And we say, well, that's a religious Jew, that's a Sephardi, he's an Ashkenazi, he's a this Jew, he's a that Jew. The truth is that a Jew's a Jew's a Jew's a Jew. There's no difference. In essence, they're the same. The difference only is on the surface. But if you dig deep enough, every single Jew has deep diamonds and well springs of water down there. And you just have to believe it. And that's what Yitzchak did. Now, the problem with Yitzchak is Yitzchak doesn't merit to give the blessings to Esau because he wasn't ready for it. He wasn't prepared enough for it. And Rivka sees this. Rivka, Yitzchak's wife, Rebecca, she knows the power of Esau. But she sees that in Esau's particular status, if he receives the blessings, it will be a disaster. He's not yet been refined. The only one that will be able to elevate Esau is Yaakov, is Jacob. We're told that Abraham was all about love and affection, Abraham. Yitzchak was all about strictness and rules, but because he knew that deep down there was something beautiful over there. But the problem is that neither of them had the correct balance. The greatness of coming third, Yaakov, is that he had the balance. He had learned from his forefather, from his father and grandfather about discipline. He learned about kindness and love. And now he was able to find the right path. He was able to balance it out. And Rivka said, Rivka knew better than Yitzchak. Rivka said, Yitzchak, in theory, this is all going on in a spiritual sense. In theory, Yitzchak, you're correct. Esau is on a higher level. And she loves Esau very much. How do we know that she loves Esau so much? How do you know that Rivka loves Esau? It seems like she doesn't. It seems like all she loves is Yaakov. Because who does she send away when she has to send somebody away? She could have said, Esau, get lost. Esau listened to the one thing that Esau did is he had respect for his parents. You're threatening Yaakov, go. Now, what does she say? No. Esau needs his father. Jacob, you go. You don't need your father. But you've got the blessings. And when the time is right, you will refine your brother Esau. But you need those blessings. So therefore, she tricks her husband, so to speak, because in the perspective of where her husband was, he thought that Yitzchak Esau, and he wasn't really ready to accept the fact that he wasn't going to be able to elevate this hidden, deep, beautiful spark that was hidden in Esau. But what he does do is he's able to recognize the beauty in Yitzchak. And when you see what happens in the story of the blessings, when Jacob ends up putting on the garments of Esau that he receives from his mother, brings the cooked dishes, acting like he is he's acting like he's Esau, like he's Esau. What then happens? What happens is he gets the blessing. Esau comes back. What does Yitzchak say? Yitzchak doesn't say, oh boy, Yaakov tricked you, you should be cursed. No, we're told that he feels this feeling of hell, like he feels like terrible, sudden pain. What's that feeling? He recognizes that he's not going to be able to elevate Esau. And he realizes and he says, Gam hu yeh baruch. Also, he will be blessed. He doesn't take away the blessing from Yaakov. He knows that Yaakov tricked him. But he recognized that his wife Rebecca was right and that only Yaakov is going to have the power to elevate Esau. By the way, Yaakov starts that process of elevating Esau, when they meet afterwards. After Yaakov has his whole family and all his children, and they come back and they meet each other, you see Esau stops and doesn't want to kill him anymore. That's one stage of elevation. But we're told that Esau, I'm hoping that you all know what I'm talking about. If there's something that you're getting lost and you're not sure of the details, I'll fill you in. So just interrupt. When Esau says to Yaakov, after they re-meet, after they have all their families and Esau has all his soldiers, Esau says, come, let's walk together. And Yaakov says, no, my family is young and we've got sheep. If I push them too much, they'll all die. We'll come. And the rabbis say, but Yaakov never ever went back to Esau. He stopped in the way. Did he lie? He says, no, he was giving a prophecy that when Mashiach comes, we will have elevated Esau. Esau is terrible, is tremendous sparks. Nevertheless, we're told that some of the greatest rabbis were descendants of Esau, like Rabbi Meir. He was one of the great rabbis of history. He was one of the most, his name is mentioned probably more than any other name, or his opinion is mentioned more than any other person in the Mishnah. And according to many opinions, he is a descendant of Esau. So we've done that refining. But the ultimate refinement of the people of Esau will happen in the time of Mashiach. So in other words, Yitzchak was 100% correct. There's something deep down good inside Esau, but it gets hidden. So here's the thing. As Jewish people, we know that we've been through a lot over the years. Over history, we've been through a lot. And at different times, we always felt that sometimes the persecution actually kept us together. If you look at the Holocaust, one thing that we saw, which is quite odd if you think about it, is that the Nazis didn't care if you were an Esau type of Jew, or you were a Yaakov type of Jew. They didn't care what color hat you wore, how long your beard was, or the lack thereof of hat or anything. All they cared about was the fact that you're Jewish. They know, the Nazis understood one thing, that a Jew is a Jew. And it doesn't make a difference what they practice. On the opposite side, and I want to say, because this is a really important message that I think that I've been thinking about, is that when we know people that have, God forbid, been abused or had terrible things happen to them, and they feel like they're a victim or like they're being held captive by somebody else, the lesson is that nobody could ever take away your true core and essence. You are always in charge of who you are, your essence, your real being. And sometimes we do things or things happen to us that we don't like, and we say, oh, I'm messed up. There's something wrong with me. Or that person has made me think that there's something wrong with you. That's not possible. You just have to dig deeper and you'll find your true essence, your true goodness. Now, I want to tell you another concept. I'll pause for a moment because this is one idea which I've more or less completed. And there's another concept that I want to learn out from the story of Avram and Yitzchak, Yitzchak and Esau. But before I go into that story, sorry, my eyes look a little bit funny. Just allergies are make it a little bit itchy and red, so my apologies about that. Does anybody have any quick questions on what I've said so far before I go on to talk to the last section of this year? No?
I'll ask a quick one, Rabbi. Esau generally gets a pretty bad run in Jewish culture and literature. He's often painted and pointed to as like, don't be like him. But from what you're saying, there's some redeeming features. So is there ever a circumstance where people are encouraged to find a path like him?
No. Good question, but I would say the answer is no. We never encourage people to do wrong. It reminded me of when I was in yeshiva. I was talking about at the beginning of this thing of what a Hasidic Farbrengen, and one of the central kind of novel ideas that Chabad instituted is the concept of a Farbrengen. Farbrengen is not just to teach and you inspire, but you sometimes have heart-to-heart discussions, and sometimes would go and do. It's part of the program within Chabad life. Okay, Farbrengens, and you should join one the next time we'll make one, where you sit and you spy, you say l'chaim, but sometimes you say a little bit more than you should, whatever. But that's part of the. Anyway, so once it's like 2:00 in the morning, we've been sitting in Farbrengen in yeshiva, in a yeshiva, and there was another South African kid who I actually happened to see. I haven't seen him in years, but because I saw on the Zoom today. Happened to see him. I'm not going to say his name is Yitzchak as well. I'm not going to say his last name. He's a South African boy who was in yeshiva with me. But he was a real Yaakov. He was just a pure holy boy. He never did anything wrong. So the rabbi, the Rav, the Mashpia, who we call him, he says, Yitzchak, taseh mashu. Yitzchak, do a sin. Just do something wrong. You're too good. But he was obviously joking. But he was saying that there's a certain innocence about you that he couldn't stand. It's like you're almost like too good to believe. This guy was always on time and he's always learning well. And it's almost like, too good to believe. So that's maybe the exception. But generally, that's not the case. We don't encourage people, God forbid, to take bad paths. But we do say that if somebody happens to find themselves in a situation which is less than desirable, then they should not believe that that is who they are. They should never say, this is who I am. And never say, well, this is what would we as rabbis, Rabbi, I'm not this, I'm not that. I don't do this. And we kind of put ourselves in boxes, and I say, well, I can't lose weight. Or, from a Jewish perspective, I say, oh, I don't keep kosher, and that's it. Rabbi, I don't go to shul, I don't study, Rabbi, all those things, that these boxes that we put ourselves in, are we saying that, okay, maybe that's where you happen to be holding, but that's not who you are. My wife is saying Esau had temptation. That wasn't the problem. His issue was that he fell for it. Yes, I think that's a good point that she's making. In other words, what she's saying is that it's okay. Nobody's perfect. God doesn't expect us to be perfect people. We all make mistakes. We all fall. We all have temptations. The problem is how sunken into we get into those temptations, and we have to remember that we're all in that category. Nobody's perfect, but don't for one moment convince yourself that you are that person. If I tell my son off because they do something wrong, and that's what they do something that they shouldn't do, I don't say, oh, you're bad. No, I say it's unbecoming of you. You're better than that. Even though they may have done it 10 times already. Because if I tell them that they're bad, or that, oh, how could you do it? What's wrong with you? I'm telling them in their mind that there's something wrong with them. And there is nothing wrong with them. They happen to have gotten used to doing something that they shouldn't, a bad habit. Unfortunately, people start to develop, to decide that their bad habits are who they are. And that's the problem. So we all have habits that we have to try to get rid of.
Rabbi,
Yes.
would that be like, say, a deaf person can't get in trouble for listening to Lashon Hara, but a person who can hear resist the temptation?
I don't understand the question. Can a
Well,
deaf person get in trouble for listening to gossip?
yeah. Well, they can't listen to gossip. They don't have the opportunity to. So
Right.
is someone who has the facility, the opportunity, and then resists is more praiseworthy than someone who hasn't got the ability to begin with?
In a certain way, yes. I'm saying, obviously, we're not going to say that person has, a deaf person has their own challenges, and when they do them, it's on a much higher level in a certain way. When a person, any obstacle that a person has in a much higher level, but when you have a particular struggle and you overcome it, it's higher. I'll tell you a quick story about this, and I'll move on to the next point. The story that I wanted to tell you is that. And I may have said this many times because it's just a story that keeps on recurring, about a man that came to the Rebbe that was met by a Chabad student on the corner of a street somewhere in Manhattan, and they got into a conversation. He said, what's happening? He said, oh, I'm not so interested in Judaism, and through the conversation, the man find out that he was going to be marrying somebody that's not Jewish, and the Rebbe and the student said, I suppose talk to him about it. And he said, do me a favor, before you get married, go to the Rebbe, talk to the Rebbe. And the student arranged a private audience with him and the Rebbe. Anyway, he goes to the Rebbe whenever that appointment comes. And when he comes to the Rebbe, he tells the Rebbe the situation. I found a beautiful girl. She's not Jewish. I'm going to be marrying her. But, I was told to come and talk to you about it. And the Rebbe said, wow, I'm envious of you. So he said, what? You're envious of me? He said, yeah. Well, why are you envious of me? He said, I'll tell you why. Because we have a principle in Judaism that God never gives anybody a test that they're not able to withstand. And if God gives you a test, that means you have the strength to withstand it. So therefore, the Rebbe says, the fact that I've never had such a test means that I wouldn't possibly means that I would never be able to withstand it. But the fact that you were given the test, that you find yourself in this situation, and it's such a strong desire to marry this particular person, that means that God has given you incredible strength to be able to overcome such a great test. So the person was obviously blown away. He ended up not marrying when he realized the power of what the Rebbe had told him, that he had the strength not to do it. And he ended up relating the story himself. But this is the power of this concept. When we have a struggle, we have the power to overcome it. That's the story of Esau. Esau was just in a style at a time where he wasn't able to be refined by Yaakov. Esau himself is a Jew, but his descendants lose that because he was not redeemable at that stage. But he was just like something, the primordial state of this concept. But future Jews are in a state that every single Jew has a way to be delivered if we have the right path to them. Everybody can be helped. Nobody's beyond help, and that's the belief of Yitzchak. Yitzchak just thought that he was the right person. He was not. Okay, so here's the other idea that I want to explain to you. I had a little bit of a reunion last night with several people that went to the Kinnis last year. And they decided that it was extremely inspirational for them, and they really enjoyed it. And they gained so much, they made them grow in their Judaism in such a powerful way. If anybody is able and interested to go in the future, and we're just talking. It was a group that I joined, and I took somebody else along with last year, and they decided in honor of the Kinnos that we're going to get together. So one person said, last year I came back from this guy that I've been learning with for some years now, and he said, I came back from this Kinnos in America. I was so inspired. I just never felt in such a high in my life, and I had been trying to get this guy to go for years. And I thought, I'd never go. Eventually, somebody convinced me to go. Whatever the case was, I went. And as soon as I came back, I was really looking to book my ticket for this year. And of course, we know that this year never happened. And he said something powerful last night. He said, but one thing that I've learned is that really the real power comes when you don't need to always get re-inspired. That you're able to be strong in and of yourself without that reboost, that out refire. Now, of course, we always have to go get re-energized. And one of the things that the Rebbe kind of wanted, Hasidism wanted, was that Jews come back once a year or once in a while to their Rebbe to get re-inspired. So I was listening to this man, and he said, what? We have to find a way to inspire ourselves without going to the Kinnis. And I thought it was quite incredible what he had said. And I said the following. The unique thing about what Chabad was, if you think about Chabad to all other groups, to all other Hasidic groups, particularly after the Holocaust, but since the start of the Hasidic movement, and generally most movements, was that most movements, they wanted their Rebbe to be very close to them. They wanted their followers to all live close to them, that they could keep an eye on them, keep on watching over them, keep on inspiring them. And if they moved too far away, they would lose the inspiration and lose their connection. The Rebbe, and this was kind of a Chabad idea, not just started from the Rebbe, but the Rebbe really took it to a new level. He said, no, I have my followers. Once you've got to a certain level that you're able to inspire yourself, you don't belong there anymore. Leave New York, go away, go find another community. And as Jonathan Sachs said, that I spoke about last week in the words of the late Jonathan Sachs, he said the Rebbe wanted to create leaders. He said, go and find other people to inspire. Don't stay here. If you always need to be re-inspired by somebody else, then you are not yourself independently inspired. And the Rebbe, the ultimate test was when he was going to send away those shluchim and see if they could stand strong. And the whole rest of the Hasidic world said, the Rebbe is doing suicide. They're going to go out to all these places and they're going to lose their connection to Judaism. They're going to just become part of the nationals or the place that they go. They'll lose their unique identity. And of course, we know that the total opposite, that the Rebbe, the people that he went, they made and built communities of thousands of others. Now, something unique happened afterwards, is that 26 years ago, the Rebbe passed away, and it was the first time that a Hasidic movement, that this Hasidic movement was left without a physical leader that we could see. And now, not only were we not getting the ability to fly in and get inspiration, not only were we not getting the ability to at least hear new live recordings or something, or have some type of knowledge that he was there in New York for us, but now we had to be truly independent. And the questions, if you read the news articles that came out in 1994, when the Rebbe passed away, they all spelled death to the Chabad movement. But the one thing that they forgot is that the ultimate, and that would have been every other group over the years, that when they've had their moments, when they've lost their leader, they've died. But what they didn't understand is that the Rebbe had built something much stronger. He had taught us to inspire ourselves. He'd given us all the teachings. We have it's his teachings, and all the predecessors and all the Torah, but it's an outlook. How we could be in the middle of a land, in the middle of Nairobi or Taiwan or the UAE, and you could still remain not only a strong Jew, but stronger and bring more people closer, get more people involved in Judaism. How is that possible? And the reason is because he inspired us to such a point where the inspiration wasn't fleeting. It became who we were, and we were then able to live off that. This is the wellspring that we dug. He dug deep out into us, like Yitzchak, and he helped us find the wellsprings inside of us. Now, one of the other things that's unique about the story of Yitzchak and Abraham is that Abraham we know as the greatest, the most influential person in a way. He went from place to place and he told people about God, that there's a God. It was a unique thing, a unique concept to the world about monotheism. But people just heard it. It was superficial. It never really changed. What happened with Yitzchak is that he didn't just make it as a fleeting, inspirational idea. He went to their level and he spoke on their level and he changed the people. The people changed because of Yitzchak. When he dug those wells, what he was showing is that he wasn't just going and speaking to places and leaving places untouched. He dug wells, and we're told that Abraham also dug wells. The difference between the wells that Abraham dug and the wells that Yitzchak dug is the wells that Abraham dug were recovered over. They never stayed. The wells that Yitzchak dug remained. Nobody covered them over. They stayed there forever. The power of Yitzchak was that when he was able to find the water, the wellspring in somebody, it stayed. And this is that second message that I wanted to show you about Yitzchak. He was able to dig deep inside of us and make the change from within us. Not like Avram, who was beyond us, and he inspired us, but he didn't change us. He went deep down into us, and we actually had a transformation. So, to sum up, getting back to where I started off with the telling you about this Farbrengen, this gathering that's been going for over 72 hours now, and I'm sure I'll probably tune in for a few minutes tonight, get a little bit more inspiration. But I started off that right at the beginning, the shliach from New Zealand told that story about the willow. Now that willow represents the Jew like Esau. Just like that Chabad Chassid, that man standing over there, that lone rabbi in the middle of New Zealand, could not make the blessing on the Lulav and Etrog without Esau, without that Jew that has nothing to him, on the Jew on the surface. But he's a Jew. And as long as he has a soul, without him, you cannot make the blessing. The same thing is my next point. Hello? Still there? And then we spoke about how deep down every single Jew has something really powerful and good. And then we went on to the second point that I wanted to bring out, is that ultimately what Yitzchak achieved was that we should be able to be good and wholesome Jews in and of ourselves. We should be able to study and inspire and be connected to the spring, to the wellspring, to the source, by digging deep within ourselves and finding that truth. That we don't waver and change from day to day. That we're strong and consistent good Jews. So that's my discussion today. There's so much more we could talk about it, but our time is up. So thank you everyone for joining. Wish you all a wonderful night. And everybody is welcome to unmute yourself and ask any questions or complaints, arguments, as you wish, or also welcome to say goodnight.
Oh, how can I resist? Would Esau be acceptable as the 10th man in a minion?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Why not?
Because it's like the lulav, yeah? It's
okay. So there are certain laws that we say that a 10th person, if you've done certain sins, like, that we would exclude certain people. It's not necessarily universally held. That's one point. But that's not like the letter of the law. That's more like decrees in order to make people not do certain things, that there would be certain level of unwelcome if you do certain things that are unbecoming. But in essence, yes, he's part of a minyan. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
When we say that we know that Abraham was greater than Isaac, why do we say it?
Did I say that Abraham is greater than Yitzchak?
Well, it sounded to me like implication was made.
Okay. It could be that I did, but do you remember in what context I said that? Just trying to remember to answer your question.
At the end, when they were talking about wealth and talking that Abraham was above and then Isaac became something a bit lower to earth person who was able to dig something and
okay. So let me tell you what's the greatness of Abraham. Okay, the greatness of Abraham is that he was the first. That's the greatness of Abraham. In other words, the greatness of all of them is that they were the first and they continued. Abraham's greatness over everything else is that he was the first. He was the first is always the hardest, no matter what you say. He did all the hard work to discover everything, and he was able to give that over to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was able to give that over to Yaakov. Yaakov was able to give it to all his 12 sons. But when we talk about in certain way, as I said, tonight the focus was Yitzchak. This week is Yitzchak's week. So we say about, it's one point that I didn't make, by the way. When we talk about, it says that the Talmud says that when Mashiach comes, we're going to say about Yitzchak, Ki ata avinu, that you are our father. Why? Because of this story that I told you in the Talmud, where he's the one that finds the ability to defend the undefendable. And that was his strength. And to see way, way, way beyond the surface. So we don't usually say one is greater than the other. That's why I wanted to find out what actually I said that would have implied that, because then I could have maybe explained the context. But you're correct, if I'm understanding what you're saying, that in truth, he wasn't, we don't usually refer to any of them as greater. I may have said, by the way, that Yaakov is greater. Usually we refer to Yaakov as Bechir Sheba'ovos, chosen of the office. not Abraham. And the reason why we say that about Yaakov, for numerous reasons. From Kabbalistically, because he was able to combine the great qualities and get rid of the, so to speak, the lackings of Avram and Yitzchak. So Avram and Yitzchak were perfectly great Jews, but he was able to combine their greatness into one and find the absolute perfect balance. And on the second son, Avram had a son that became wicked named Ishmael, whose descendants were not great. And Yitzchak had a son named Esau, who was not great. Yaakov somehow succeeded because he had that perfect balance of perfect parenting and perfect righteousness that his forefathers weren't able to have. He was able to bring all 12 of his children and his daughters along with him on that journey. So that's why we refer to Yaakov as Bechir Shabavos. And of course, the Jewish people go on Yaakov's name, which Yaakov's name was changed to Israel. And that's why we called Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Is that answering your question?
Yes, it does.
Questions.
I'm just thinking something and need confirmation. When Abraham was young, he was living at the same time as Shem. He studied with Shem. Yes?
Correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So he would have studied with Shem and Aver, who was Shem's grandchild. Yitzchak Yitzchak did as well. Yitzchak wouldn't have, Shem would have already died, but also Avram meets Shem again later on when he fights against the 4 and the 5 kings, and the king of Melchizedek of Shalem comes out to greet him. We were told by the commentaries that was Shem. It came up.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Good to have you. Any other questions, notes, comments, points? Yes?
Rebbe, I don't have a question. I'll just say goodbye. Thank
you so much. Always wonderful to have you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Noah. Thank you.
Rabbi, I'm surprised you recognized me, my costume.
Almost couldn't. It was almost too hard. I just think, who? There was a second I thought maybe it's Noah, maybe it's Reuven. I was
see the glasses, Clark Kent.